Hello, Minnesota Golden Gophers fans. Welcome to the Gophers Nation YouTube channel. My name is Dylan Callaghan-Croley, publisher at Gophers Nation of the On3 Network, covering Minnesota and Golden Gophers athletics. Just wanted to jump on here today, talk about the news here on December 5th, 2025. A couple notables to pass along. The biggest of the day is that PJ Fleck has dismissed defensive line coach Dennis Dottin-Carter after just one season as the defensive line coach. He took over for Coach Debo, who left of course, over the offseason for the Arizona Cardinals defensive line position. But Dottie Carter, his lone season, the Gophers finished top 10 in sacks in the country, posted a top 35 run defense nationally. And plus, he recruits a pretty good recruiting class. I know Howie Johnson was recruited by Coach Debo, but, you know, uh, Dennis Dottin-Carter does go out and add Aiden H to his class. He adds Anthony Charles to his class. He had Jeremiah Benson to his class. He was somebody we just selected as being the recruiter of the year for the Gophers on the recruiting trail for the 2026 recruiting class. For a big reason being the identification and recruitment of Aiden H. But Fleck decides that he's going to move on from Dot and Carter after just one season. The Gophers defense, of course, did not have a great season. They had plenty of hiccups, especially down the stretch. But I'm not sure that I would agree that the defensive line was the predominant issue here for the Golden Gophers when it comes to their defense. We know that PJ Fleck, when you talk about the struggles, he points to three things. He points to schematics, coaching, and players. Well, I think coaching changes were needed on both sides of the ball this season. Um, but I wasn't expecting this to be necessarily the first, you know, uh, domino to fall for the Gophers defense. Now, you do look at it. They did have plenty of hiccups on the ground. Um, Purdue ran for 253, Michigan State ran for 156, Oregon ran for 179, Northwestern ran for 220. But I think you have to look at the bigger picture, right? And Purdue, Oregon, Northwestern, those are three bad run defense games, no doubt. But otherwise, in of their 12 games, they kept opponents in seven of those to under 4 yards per carry. In five of those, in five of those, they kept them to under 3.5 yards per carry. There's a lot of hiccups on the defensive line at times this year against some Russian attacks. But I don't necessarily agree with this dismissal of Dottie Carter, especially after just one season. I mean, if you're going to dismiss him after one season for that performance, then how do you keep a guy like I don't necessarily agree with dismissing after just one season, especially when you just finished top 10 in sacks. I know he doesn't necessarily coach the Russians, and that was a big part of that success. But Anthony Smith had another career season at defensive end. I know Anthony Smith has been developing well before Donnie Carter got his hands on him, but I still don't necessarily agree with this. Devin Eastern had a solid season as well there. Now you can point to, Jalen Logan Redding didn't have a great season. But I thought Rashawn Lawrence, the FCS transfer defensive tackle, had a good season. I just don't agree with this. If you're going to fire a guy after one season with some hiccups, I mean, how do you keep somebody like Danny Collins as defensive coordinator when you look at the back half of the season? Minnesota over their last, you look at the last 7 games of the season. Minnesota allowed 450 plus yards in five of their last 8 games, including three straight against Michigan State, Oregon, and Northwestern. And don't forget, Michigan State and Northwestern are not good offenses. So I mean, if you're gonna get rid of Donnie Carter after one year, I think you have to then assess Danny Collins the same way, and I don't think that's going to be what happens. I quite frankly don't. No, that's fine. I don't make these decisions. PJ Fleck does, but it's just one of those things where I think there was enough positives from Dennis Dottin-Carter this year to keep him around for one more season, especially what he was able to do on the recruiting trail this year. Um, I mean, if this is how it's going to be, then I think you have to fairly assess everybody in that pattern. And if that's the case, then I think there's a lot of coaches that, are could be in trouble. And now is that going to be the case? I'm not sure. But again, you look around, Danny Collins. Defense struggled mightily down the stretches. They ended it well against Wisconsin. But again, if you look things relatively, they kept Wisconsin under 300 total yards, but also that was a Wisconsin offense that totaled 300 yards just three times this season. The 268 yards they did have was the fifth most they had in a single game this year. So again, you look at it relatively, yeah, it was a good performance. It wasn't a great performance. So I mean, uh, I do wonder about that. I wonder about that. Perhaps there's more behind the scenes here with Dennis Dottin-Carter. We will be, of course, asking around and trying to dig to the bottom of that. But I'm just calling a spade here. If you're going to fire Dennis Dottin-Carter because of some issues on the defensive lines this year, despite there being some, I think, overall positives, then I think you have to fairly assess it the same way with a guy like. Danny Collins, and then he was shifted to the offensive side of the ball. The offensive line now has been very poor for the last, not very poor, but has been mediocre at best over the last 3 years. It was not good this year. You look at the wide receiver unit, there are some positives, but overall the development has not been there. They have missed in the transfer portal quite a bit. And yeah, if you're gonna fire Dennis Carter, fine. That's fine. I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't have to agree with it, but that is my job is to give my opinion on Minnesota Golden Gophers football, to give my opinion on the job that PJ Fleck is doing as the leader of the Minnesota Golden Gophers, and I think he's doing overall a pretty damn good job. Uh, I can disagree with the firing. Maybe he has a name in store that he's going to go out and hire who thinks he's going to do a better job. Maybe somebody, came open recently and he's like, that's a guy I want on my team. Dennis, thank you for what you did, but we're going to move on. We're going to find out if that would be the case, it would be shortly. But at the same time, it is a little bit of in terms of coaching changes, this definitely would have been a coaching change for me that I would have not had at the top of the line. I would have been looking at a few other places, and I think I would have given him a little bit more than just 1 year because of the recruiting class he just brought in. I mean, a big reason Aiden H is here is because Dennis Dottin-Carter. How's that going to affect him going forward? Howie Johnson was recruited under Coach Debo. He's a Minnesota kid. He's going to stick around. But the rest of that class was recruited by Dennis Dottin-Carter. They committed to Dennis Dottin-Carter. How's that going to affect them? I'm not saying they're going to transfer, but similar things have happened in the past. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that ultimately plays out. Yeah, and I'm not calling for Danny Collins to be fired by the Minnesota Gophers by any means. I think he deserves another year. I think there's a lot of positives to take away. Uh, some people may disagree at the word a lot, but I think there's positives to build upon for Danny Collins. I think coordinators should get more than 1 year unless it's a really true disaster. I don't think this year was a true disaster. Was this year a learning experience for Danny Collins? Absolutely. Can he get better? Absolutely. If he struggles next year, do you look at make a change? I think so, but I think he should get another year. Just like I thought Dennis Don-Carter, despite some of the struggles, deserved to get another year. I mean, was the defensive line play at times poor? Yes. Was it not always the best on the road? Absolutely. But it was pretty dominant at home, but then going back to the road, nobody on the team showed up on the road. The offense did once against Northwestern, and that was about it, right? So I mean, if you're going to blame him for the offense for the defensive line struggles on the road, then again calling a spade, the entire team struggled on the road. I don't think that's a Dennis Dottin-Carter problem. I think that's a Minnesota Golden Gophers problem because that hasn't just been this year. That's been the last 3 years. Let me look it up here. I had it in the past. I wrote it in a story a couple weeks ago, and I don't remember the story it was, but let's go since 2023 here. And you can find this on teamrankings.com. As an away team, Minnesota last three seasons, 4-11. It's just not a obviously a defensive line problem. So if you're going to blame him for the defensive line struggles on the road, again, you have to call it fairly across the board, correctly? Correct. So that's just my quick thoughts on the Dennis Dottin-Carter firing here, or dismissal. Perhaps there's something behind the scenes here that we will find out here shortly that changes. But on the surface level, definitely not something that I saw coming today. Not something that I necessarily agree with. But I don't get paid to make these decisions about Minnesota going to go Golden Gophers football. I'm just paid to assess what I see, what I hear. And we'll see what PJ Fleck has in store for that hiring. This is twofold. There's been coaches who have probably not deserved to be fired at times, who get replaced by somebody who's even better. And it, it it sometimes it backfires, sometimes it pans out. Something I from my previous experience covering Penn State football. Penn State once had former Minnesota offensive coordinator Kirk Ciarrocca as their offensive coordinator. He had a It was the 2020 season. I He had uh, an okay, not great offense for Penn State. But Penn State fires him because Mike Yurcich becomes available. And Mike Yurcich's offense has actually never matched the numbers that Schrocker's offense has posted in his one season with Penn State. So, I mean, these things have happened before, and that was a case where, Schrocka did a good enough job to stick around, probably shouldn't have been fired, but James Franklin at the time saw a guy who he wanted to be the OC at Penn State, and he fired Schrocka and hired Yurcich to come in and do the job. Some people will say it was a better hire and it worked out. Some people will say it didn't. Obviously, it didn't work out great because Yurcich eventually got fired, got replaced by Andy Kotelnicki, and now Andy Kotelnicki's offense didn't pan out for Penn State, and it's a kind of a big reason that James Franklin got fired and that whole Penn State fiasco. But these things need to be evaluated twice. Once when they happen, and once when the next hire is made, and we'll go from there. And of course, we'll see how it pans out for Minnesota next year. We'll see what Dennis Dottin-Carter ends up and see what he does as next program. But definitely on the surface, was Minnesota's defensive line perfect this season? No. Did it have its really good moments? Yes. Did it have some really poor moments? Yes. Do I think Dottin-Carter deserved another season after that? Absolutely. I think, uh, there's been some position groups for Minnesota that haven't lived up to expectations in the past, and those position coaches got more than one crack at it. So I'm gonna, like I said, I'm just gonna call a spade and see how I see it. Uh, this one just is very curious to me in terms of decision, but that's PJ Fleck's decision, not mine. Um, well, let's go to the transfer portal stuff. A couple transfer portal ongoing for Minnesota here. So as we discussed, as of Friday night, 9 guys have entered the transfer portal. Quarterback Jackson Pollock, wide receiver Quinnen Lanier, wide receiver Kenrick Lanier, wide receiver Quinn Redding, wide receiver Christian Driver, wide receiver Legend Lyons, uh, offensive tackle Reese Tripp, defensive backs Harrison Brunt and Ethan Carrier, as well as punter Caleb McGrath. Uh, on the surface, none of these are big losses for the Golden Gophers so far. Colleague, I unfortunately didn't work out for him. I thought he had some potential. Didn't necessarily see him as a sure thing for Minnesota either. But they lose depth at that position. They're already losing Evan Moorhead. What's Dylan Whitkey decide to do, right? Drake Lindsey, by all accounts, I think is going to be returning. I think they're pretty confident in retaining him. Uh, I think Max is going to return to be the backup quarterback as well. Whitkey, is running out of eligibility. Does he try to go somewhere else to play, or is he content being the number three? Don't forget, Minnesota brought in 2 quarterbacks in the 2026 recruiting cycle as well. At wide receiver, Lanier played quite a bit this season, didn't have big impact. Definitely one that hurts the depth, but I can't sit here and say I saw him necessarily translating into a truly productive wide receiver for Minnesota next year. Quinton Redding, you know, solid guy to have around the locker room, special teams guy, but at the same time, um, in today's world of college football with the new roster limits, these are the type of players that, unfortunately, if you're Minnesota, You just have to cut, well, for lack of a better word, cut bait with. Reese Tripp, Minnesota native offensive lineman. He leaves the program. So that one is one that hurts the depth numbers, but at the same time, if you're Minnesota, you're only gonna have so many numbers. You have only so many roster spots to work with. If you don't think a kid's gonna pan out and be able to be a productive member of your team, whether that's a as a starter or a backup, then it's best to tell them now to, hey, you should explore your options elsewhere. And that's what happens here. Defensive back Harrison Brunn, Ethan Carrier, both guys who are walk-ons, you know, and just in the new era of college football, these guys are being cut, unfortunately, from, the game across the country. And then punter Caleb McGrath, Tom Weston did a pretty good job this year. He's going to be the starting punter next year, barring a surprise. They have depth at that position as well, so no surprise that he is exploring his options as well. Overall, again, none of those guys really uh, major surprises in terms of entering the portal. Um, Talked about this on the Gophers Nation inside Gophers Nation board in our transfer portal thread. But I was talking to one of the fellow guys on the beat this week, and in terms of numbers, I mean, we were sitting down talking about who could lead this team this offseason, and when I was sitting down and talking to him, we came up with a good list of 18 to 25 guys we could realistically see leaving this program. Quarterback, I already said, I see Drake and Max to be back. Wittike's a question mark. Running back, a lot of it, I think there's a good chance that we see Fame Ajiboye and AJ Turner both return. Darius Taylor, we'll see what happens. He has a chance to go pro, but I think his chances of return are much higher now than what they were when the season started. Wide receiver, I still think we're going to see more movement there. Perhaps some movement that's going to surprise some people in the public. But if you're on our boards, they're not going to be surprised. A tight end, I think we're going to see a little bit of movement there. Just numbers wise, you got there's only so many guys you can have at each position now with the new limits. If you don't think they're going to, crack the field, see the field in the future, this is the time you tell them to move on. Offensive line, I think we're going to see some depth pieces move on there. Same thing we said on the defensive line. I'm curious to see what somebody like Stephen Curtis does. An FCS transfer who comes in last from the transfer portal off a big season at Southern Illinois, doesn't see the field this year. Does Minnesota was this the plan? Does Minnesota have him in the cards for next season, or do they part ways? I'm not saying he's going to enter the portal. He's just a guy that I think is in an interesting spot. I think the depth that I would be surprised if we see a depth player or two at defense on the defense at defensive end or rush end leave this portal season as well. Same could be said defensive tackle, though the Gophers are already losing multiple defensive tackles this offseason due to eligibility. Devin Eastern's gone. Rushawn Lawrence is gone. Jalen Logan Redden's gone. And Mo Amino, we don't know what his status is going into next year after missing this fall with an injury. He missed the spring at Purdue with a back injury. So, even if he returns, what is his overall health going to be like going into the next season? Defense tackle, major question mark right now for the Gophers. Linebacker, nobody stands out on paper of, guys you would think would enter the transfer portal, but that's one where the depth is pretty good. I like that position overall for the Gophers quite a bit going to the offseason. I could see perhaps somebody here, looking around saying, maybe I can get a little bit more playing time somewhere else and enter the portal. Cornerback and safety, I expect, to see a departure or two at each position. Possibly, we already did see two depth players leave, but, I expect quite a bit of movement this year just based off roster numbers, play time, and where these guys are in their career. So I still think there's going to be quite a bit of movement. You know, some of this that I've talked about is intel based. Some of it's speculation based off just number crunching. You know, how guys have developed so far in their careers and snaps played so far. A lot of it, I think, if you are a Golden Gophers fan who's on top of these things, you can probably figure out. Uh, I, of the 17, 25 guys that I sat down and listed out, I think you could probably figure out most of those guys as well. And I think there's always a chance for a couple surprises along the way, but I expect quite a bit more movement for the Golden Gophers this season. I expect this offseason, I expect quite a bit of movement, incoming transfers as well to, of course, replace a lot of the talent that will be leaving. So perhaps I'm overestimating how many guys will leave this offseason, but the way I sat down and look at it was not necessarily uh, do I expect them to, but if I was the coach and staff, would I sit down and say, hey, I think you should explore your options. So that's how I looked at it. That's why it may be quite different than what reality turns out to be. But we'll see. It's fair to say if I was the coaching staff, there was another, almost 2 dozen players that I would have, sat down and said that if you want to play, it's best to look elsewhere. So we'll see what happens. Again, some of that is intel based, some of that is just, looking at the numbers. Again, we'll see what happens. But overall, thanks everybody for tuning in to today's episode, going over these couple notes here. Like I said, we're going to be doing these a lot more often going forward. I hope you enjoyed this little one. And yeah, be sure to go over to Gophers Nation. You could sign up. Right now, I think let's see what you see our offer is currently. Unfortunately, you guys just did miss our great Black Friday and Cyber Monday offers, but you can join right now. You got a free trial for 2 days for $1, and then so first 2 days for $1, and then 119 for the year, which is still a great deal for all the information we provide, in my opinion. But you can take advantage of that deal and much more over at gophersnation.com. And we'll be back at it shortly. I'm sure to talk more Minnesota and go to Gophers football. Have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoyed the conference championships games around college football. We should find out on Sunday where exactly the Golden Gophers will be going bowling this season. Talk soon.